Hi, everyone. So welcome to this panel. It's called From Scroll to Soul, Building Tech That Matters, IRL. My name is Jessica Krull, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Allure and Self. I so appreciate you all being here with us today. I'm joined by Justin McLeod, who is the founder and CEO of Hinge, the dating app that's designed to be deleted. And he attended Harvard Business School, where he was inspired to get a girlfriend. And so, founded Hinge in February 2011. And the company was acquired by Match Group in 2018. But Hinge is now the second most downloaded dating app in the US and is setting up a date every 2 seconds globally. And in 2024, Hinge generated $550 million in revenue, almost 40% year-over-year growth. So that's pretty cool.
Awesome.
Thanks for being here, Justin. And we also have Bill Reddy. He's the CEO of Pinterest and a member of its board of directors. He has also worked at Google, PayPal, Venmo, and Braintree. And under his leadership, Pinterest has hit a record 570 million monthly active users, a $1 billion plus in revenue for Q4. But most importantly, and this is something that I've heard out in the streets, social media users feel like it's more positive than most other apps, and it's a respite from the toxicity of the internet.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. So thank you so much, Bill and Justin, for being here with us today. I think I want to start with talking about metrics of success. When it comes to the majority of social media apps that I think we engage with, we know the metric is time spent, right? How long are you on the app? How many downloads? That kind of thing. But in speaking to both of you all, the metric of success is a little bit different. And so I'd like to hear from both of you all the metric that you tell your team is the most important metric for success.
Well, maybe I'll start, and I think we have some common views here, although we're measuring for different outcomes. But I think one of the things that it was a big shift when I came in as CEO 3 years ago, and Pinterest, like other social platforms, was optimizing for maximum view time. And we shifted from that to optimizing for other successful outcomes that were actions that would improve your real life. We say we want to help people find the inspiration to create a life they love. Well, if people are just stuck glued to a screen, staring at a screen all the time, are they really creating a life they love? And so we changed the measure of success to say, oh, we want to actually help create real world outcomes. And it totally shifted the kind of content that surfaced on our platform. And I think is actually, part of when you step back and say like, well, how does social media become toxic? Because if we go back to the early days of social media, there was a time when social media was helping us, reconnect with long lost friends and be closer to our neighbors and helping democracies rise up. Until one day it wasn't. And what changed? Algorithms got put in charge of what we see. Instead of it being a chronological feed of what our friends posted, algorithms got put in charge of what we see, sort of earlier forms of AI, and the AI was asked to maximize our view time. And the AI figured out you look longer at the things that trigger you, whatever your triggers are. And so that was one of my beliefs coming into Pinterest was, well, how do we prove that you could tune the AI for positivity? But if you're going to tune it for positivity, you can't ask it to maximize view time, because maximizing view time isn't leading to healthy outcomes. I know you had similar thoughts as to like thinking about outcomes versus view time. So
yeah, definitely. And by the way, they don't just stare at it longer; they share it more often, and so it creates this vicious cycle.
That's right.
And so Hinge, when I started it in 2011, and we'd go out and raise money from venture capitalists, they would go look and compare us to other apps that were social at the time, Instagram, whatever, and they would say, how much time are people spending in app? What's your daily over monthly number of sessions per day? And so we would start optimizing those things, and the model was clearly like the other dating apps that were becoming popular at the time, which was to build a pretty like gamified experience where you got a whole lot of matches maybe, and spent a lot of time on the app, but maybe actually weren't finding success out in terms of getting on dates, and which is why I think people come to a dating app ideally. And so in around 2015, this article came out in Vanity Fair called "The Dawn of the Dating Apocalypse," where Hinge was pretty heavily featured. And I stepped back. I'm like, gosh, this really isn't the company that I wanted to build. This isn't what I wanted to do. And so we tore down the entire code base in the brand, let go of half the company, rebuilt from scratch, and set our North Star metric as, I know this is shocking, great dates, and we actually asked our users if they were going on dates and if they were good, and every feature from then on became about, are we getting more users out on good dates, even if that meant less time in app and less engagement, because for us, we're a subscription business anyway. We don't care if you spend how much time you spend in the app, right? We actually want you to just get out on dates. And there was a hard short-term decision, took a lot of pain in the near term, and I think you have a very parallel story on that front. But over time, we really bucked the industry, created a very different product, and as you said, now we're growing 40% year over year, and when the rest of the industry is really stagnated and is starting to shrink. And so building that sustainable business model that's actually in service of your customers' needs is, I think, the path forward.
Yeah. I loved hearing your story that like you're the fastest growing in the industry by actually doing the right thing. Like that's one of the things, we want to prove that there's a more positive business model for social media, one not built on engagement via enragement, but actually helping people feel better. But we know that there's got to be a good business in it because we don't want to be the only ones. We hope that we actually attract competition into that. Like what a world it would be if we could wake up and social media platforms were competing on their safety records the same way that auto manufacturers do. Like, wow, that would be a totally different world. So we actually want to prove that it's something that others should want to compete on too. So hearing that you're the best performing in your industry by having made these choices, like, okay, that's great. Like hopefully it attracts others to want to make these kinds of choices.
Yeah, I mean, and you both bring up a really important point, is like at the end of the day, money is also a big metric. I think any business is run and revenue is a metric. I know that on Hinge there are no ads, and you mentioned your subscription model. You do have ads on Pinterest, but I'd be interested to hear, you just told us what your North Star purpose is, right? How do you balance that with having it answered for people's paychecks, which is also an important part for a CEO?
Sure, yeah. I mean, well, again, like coming in, to me, the way to affect change in this was, again, if you look at social media, and if the goal is to try to prove a more positive model for it, like step back and you have, one of the largest, most profitable business models in the world has engagement via enragement, a lot of toxicity sort of at the core of the business model. Well, if you want to change that, you need to prove there's a different way to go make money, right? Like, when did you start to have more auto manufacturers making electric vehicles? Is when they saw like, oh, you can actually make money on an electric vehicle. And yes, you need some thoughtful policy and things like that to help spur that along. Social media probably also needs some more thoughtful policy to help with that. But we wanted to prove that there's a good business in it. And, to that point, I think a lot of the choices that have been made up to this point, are sort of short-term versus long-term. Because, start with just the statement that we want to optimize for the long-term well-being of our users and customers. That should not be a provocative or controversial thing to say. Like, oh my gosh, like the leaders of most businesses would say, well, yeah, of course. How is that not true in social media? Why is that such a distinctive thing in social media? It shouldn't be. That's a pretty low bar. Because every other business leader, or most other business leaders say, like, of course we want to optimize for the long-term well-being of our customers. Because if you don't, that's pretty short-sighted. And so your question about advertising, even for advertisers that are going onto these platforms that, yes, have tons of view time, in the short term, maybe the advertiser gets to get more impressions. In the long term, most advertisers are trying to sell a product, whether it's, fashion or beauty or apparel or something you're going to buy for your home or a car you're going to buy. It's something you're going to do in the real world. So for the vast majority of advertisers, if you play enough rounds of the game and the future is like we're all just zombies staring at a screen all the time, that's not in their long-term interest either. So a lot of what we've tried to do is, for our advertisers, say, one, great brands are built on positivity. And so if we build a more positive environment, that's going to be good for you and your brand to show up there. Also, if you're trying to, get to real-world outcomes, whether it's, somebody buying, that outfit's just going to help them sort of walk a little taller and feel a little better about themselves, or like buy that thing that's going to just complete the room so they feel better about hosting friends and family. If you want those things to happen, that's also not about time looking at a screen. It's about some action you're going to take off that screen in the real world. And so, again, changing the measures of success with a long-term view to say, well, the thing you're looking at right now is time spent and impressions, but what I think you ought to be looking at is like actions off that platform, and we're going to drive more of those. That's actually good for you, the advertiser, in the long term, and good for the health of our users in the long term. we're finding those things have really aligned. And when I came in 3 years ago, Pinterest was declining, and it was sort of aging up and aging out. And when we look back, we've become one of the fastest growing properties in social media. Gen Z is our largest, fastest growing demographic, more than 40% of the platform. And if you ask Gen Z why they come to Pinterest, one of the first things they'll say, they see it as a safe space away from the toxicity they experience elsewhere. It was doing the right thing was good for business. And I hope we can prove more of that and actually attract others to do the same.
And for you, word of mouth is kind of the biggest part of having a successful business, right?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. So one thing I think is, as a leader of a business, like, what are you really here to do? Are you here to make money, or are you here to do something in the world that's economically viable? For me, I'm here to do something in the world that's economically viable. And so we root back to, and I think if you look at mission-oriented businesses, they always succeed over the long term, because if your goal is to make money and you're a short-term manager, you're always going to make the trade-offs that how can I enrich myself a little bit more today, and then the company is they'll have to deal with it further down the line. But if you're really truly mission-oriented, then you're making decisions like what actually is going to serve our customer, what's going to serve our mission the best, and then you actually develop a more sustainable business model. And I think for Hinge, luckily we are in a world where we make our money directly from our customers, and so we could be pretty aligned when we get our users out on great dates. It was a slower to grow business because word of mouth growth starts small and then gets big over time. But we had that discipline to maintain that. Other businesses, I think, are out there. They're trying to be sustainable by I think about it kind of like junk food versus healthy food, and what are you really trying to sell? Junk food can be a lot easier to sell in the short term, but it leaves your customers feeling kind of sick and not so great, and over time maybe they're going to turn away from it. And now what I see is a lot of companies out there who are saying junk food, but we're going to give you a free calorie counter. And so it's oh, here's a highly addictive platform, but we're going to let you know when you've used it for 2 hours straight, and we'll shame you for it. And I'm not sure that that also is a super. I would rather we just make the food healthier, and show people that there's a way to build a business that's around healthy food as opposed to junk food with a calorie counter next to it.
Well, even in media, what I do with editing, the metric we talk about most now isn't page views, right? Isn't the number of people who came and clicked. It's how long they spent. Loyalty is the metric that we're trying to measure the most. And I think for both of you, loyalty is sort of the metric, right? It's when you build a platform that people enjoy using so much that they want to tell someone else about it once they've had a success story, or someone comes back to it because they're oh, what was that thing that I saw on Pinterest? I want to look at that again. This is a metric of loyalty that we're trying to build. And I think it's the same in many industries right now.
And were we additive to their life instead of being addictive, right? Just even that notion are we additive versus addictive? It's just a huge sort of paradigm shift of how you would think about these things.
Right. Both of you all count Gen Z as a major part of your audience. And, Gen Z and social media, they kind of have a tepid relationship, right? And there's been a lot of conversation about how social media negatively impacts the youngest generation. So I'd be interested to hear both of you speak a little bit about how do you feel it's a safe way to approach this particular audience, and what responsibility do you take in keeping them safe as the youngest generation? I think I would love to hear from you, Justin.
Sure. So first of all, we're a dating app, so 18 plus. So we're not
legally 18 plus
for the record. I think it really comes back to what I was saying before about junk food calorie counter or healthy food. If you're selling healthy food, then I don't have to think too much, right? Of course we want to create our boundaries, but we're just trying to actually get people out on great dates. And people don't spend a lot of time on our platform. A lot of Gen Z will spend 3 hours a day on scrolling social media, and on average, you're using Hinge 3 minutes a day, and then getting out on a date. So for us, we just stay true to what we're here to do and what our objective is, and mostly it takes care of itself.
Great.
And I would say a couple things I'd say. One, you hear a lot about the rise in anxiety and depression and the negative impacts of social media on young people, and I think the data has become overwhelmingly clear that is in fact the case. And so there's a lot to be concerned and worried about there. I also think there's reason for hope. And so what are the things I'd point you to that are reasons for hope? So, on the first point, the kids are not all right. On the second point, though, Gen Z, I think even more than millennials, understand that what's happening on social media isn't good for them. They just haven't had better, healthier choices. To your health food comparison, like, they knew it wasn't healthy for them, but did they have healthier alternatives? And how do you make it easier for them to choose the healthier alternatives? So some things I'd point to that give reason for hope. First one, we were the first and still the only platform to make our platform private only for users under 16. Not private by default, private only. Because we looked at it, and as a CEO and as a parent, I said, I just don't think it's safe for kids under 16 to be discoverable by strangers online. And you say that out loud, and most people sort of say, like, well, duh. But like, that's what we have come to accept, and that is what our young people are experiencing. If you ask them, how many of them have experienced a harm? How many have experienced an unwanted sexual advance? How many have experienced harassment? The percentages are astounding. It is the majority of them. But they can't leave it because their friends are there, right? It's a collective action problem. But, when we switched to private only for under 16, that was at a time when we had not yet won with Gen Z. People thought we were aging up and aging out, and Pinterest was. And when we did that, our stock dropped over 20%. People thought it'd be the end of us with Gen Z. And fast forward a year later, we had nearly doubled because it became the primary reason we won with Gen Z. Back to, like, the kids are, they're looking for healthier alternatives. Gen Z is now more than 40% of our platform. It's our largest, fastest growing demographic. And if you ask them why they come to Pinterest, one of the first things they'll say is they see it as a safer space away from the toxicity they experience elsewhere online. And so, okay, that's one reason for hope, that, okay, if they get healthier alternatives, they'll choose it. Secondly, I think there's other really positive movements that are happening where, we've also come out and advocated for things like phone-free schools. We started, not only did we advocate for phone-free schools, we started in our app when users, if we see a school-age user open our app during school hours, we actually give them a prompt and we'll say, we love you and we care about your education. Come back and see us after school. And oh, by the way, here's a link to turn off all the notifications on your device so you can focus on your learning. And, not only have we done those things, you're seeing the phone-free school movement gain steam. Like, this is happening in states across the country. I was in Paris last week and met with the Macron administration where they're looking at banning social media for under 15. And I think there's real momentum from parents, from teachers, and from young people that they're realizing what's happening to them in social media isn't good for them, and they're looking for alternatives. And when you both provide healthier alternatives, they'll choose it. Two, when you make it easier to address the collective action problem, which is like, oh, well, I know I probably shouldn't be there, but all my friends are there, so I have to be there. Well, if the whole school is turning it off during school hours, I can let it go too. And so I think there's reason for hope for that.
The same thing actually happened at Hinge. It's a bit surprising how fast Gen Z became, like 18 to 25 grew for us, because we kind of featured ourselves as a 25 to 35, and we did the reboot, designed to be deleted, find your person, but the values that came out of that for us were vulnerability and authenticity and intentionality. And then we found that we were really starting to grow fast among 18 to 25 because they're just attracted to those values. I think they've seen what happens when they're stuck on their screens all day looking at superficial stuff or outrageous stuff. And they know. I mean, if you look at the stats, over the last 20 years, young people are spending 1,000 fewer hours a year, 70% less time together in person.
Yeah.
And almost all of that time has been displaced with time spent staring at their screen, absorbing media. And that is like, we are seeing the impact of that in terms of people's mental health, in terms of depression and anxiety, and we're waking up to it slowly. And I hope when we're just waking up to that right now, right as we're about to have a whole other wave of AI come in and create a whole new realm of insane toxicity. So
before we get to the AI, because of course we have to talk about AI, every panel is required to talk about AI at Aspen Ideas. But I want to get to some positivity before that. And I want to talk about something you touched on, which was like the values of a company, right? We know that especially the younger generations expect the companies that they engage with to have some sort of values and initiatives. Those can be seen on the app, but those can also be seen off the app. And I know that both of you all are working. You mentioned the phone-free schools lobbying that you all are doing, but also I'm very interested in the one more hour, right? Because obviously, as you said, the young people aren't all right. They don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know how to talk to people in real life.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in this One More Hour initiative that you all support.
Yeah, so One More Hour came, it's from Hinge, and it was started with $1 million in grants to organizations that are just getting people together. And we wanted to raise awareness around that people are spending 1,000 fewer hours per year together with their friends, and we want to just encourage them with a very bite-sized idea of, can you just spend like 1 more hour together in person and support groups that were getting together on a weekly basis or on some sort of regular basis, and just support those groups to say that, like, we are a platform that believes in getting off the app and actually out in real life. We want to be a utility. We're not an entertainment platform where you just sit there and absorb. We are a utility to get people off the app and out in real life, and we want people spending as much time out in person as possible, and we want to support that any way we can. We do it through our core work at Hinge, and it's bolstered by One More Hour. And again, I think a lot of companies will do little social initiatives that sort of offset. So they do harm with their core business, and they're like, oh, but we give 5% of our profit to offset all the harm that we do. So to any company that's going to do a social initiative, I'd say, like, first fix your core business, make sure that's not doing harm. Then, like, great, the sugar on top can be an initiative like One More Hour, which I'm very proud of, and I'm glad we're doing.
Yeah, you have the Youth Mental Health Core that you're working on.
Yes, I think on these, back to like things we can do in the real world, to your point, we optimize our platform for getting people into real world activities. But other things that we've been doing to help address youth mental health, we, in partnership with AmeriCorps and the Schultz Family Foundation, we launched the Youth Mental Health Corps, which said, like, okay, this is an epidemic. We need to find multiple ways to help address the youth mental health crisis. And what the Youth Mental Health Corps does, it's now live in 18 states, and we're adding every year. But it actually trains young people to help other young people, right? And you get a twofold effect. One, you get job creation through that, but it's also for young people that are struggling with mental health. They now have peers or near peers. We're like, okay, if you think about it when you were a kid, like, well, if you're in junior high, you sort of look up to the high school kids and like, what are they doing? I want to be that. Well, now if one of those high school kids is saying, like, hey, it's okay to not be okay. And here's resources to get you to. Here's folks that you can go talk to. That maybe the next step is getting to a physician or a mental health professional. But they're an access point to say it's okay to go have this conversation. Or if you're in high school, the college kid that you sort of look up to, and they say it's okay to not be okay. Let me get you there, to resources that can help you. So we're engaging these things as well. We just recently. To your point of, how healthy it is to engage in the real world, we've just recently started sponsoring women's sports, and I think there's a lot to be done around that, of just like youth sports generally, of just finding more reasons to not be on the device, to be engaging in the real world. And this is, back to the phone-free schools, you're now seeing real momentum around that. And school after school, if you go talk to not only the parents, but the kids, they're happier, they feel better, anxiety and depression are down. And when this went in place at my daughter's own school, one of the things I heard from the teachers, they said, it just sounds like a school again. Because when the bell rings and the kids are going between classes, like, they're talking to each other instead of like walking around like zombies looking at a phone. And so, how important is it to get these real world interactions like what you were talking about, like what we're pushing for? I think these really, really matter for well-being, for human connection. And so I do think, that's really important. And, it doesn't mean that you can't be successful as a digital platform. I think you have to think about measuring success differently.
Yeah. Okay, so now we come to AI, all right? Because you're both using it. And I think everyone's talking about how do you use it responsibly, right? Because we're all going to use it. It can be a powerful tool, but, with great power comes great responsibility, all of that.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear a little bit about your stance on AI for your company and, what boundaries you've set around AI usage within your companies.
So it's boundaries, and then it's the objective function. And I would argue the most important thing is like, what are you aiming this thing to do?
That's right.
Right.
And then you create some boundaries, of course, around that to make sure it doesn't go off the rails as it continues to go do that thing. But if it's aimed at the wrong thing, then you can put all the boundaries you want around it. But if it's aimed at, keeping you engaged, building an emotional connection with you, then it's going to be a pretty. I'm very, very concerned specifically about things like AI companions. There are companies out there that are building AI chatbots that are meant to. Like, it's one thing to use an AI chatbot as a utility. Like, I'm trying to accomplish this thing. Can you accomplish this research project for me? Can you, figure out X, Y, and Z? Great. Very good use of that technology. When people start sort of backwards engineering it, or there are companies out there who are very much engineering it to become, to create emotional connection with you, I think that is like a very, very risky.
Yeah, so Hinge isn't going to be hooking me up with my AI boyfriend.
No. Yeah, and I think that right, there has been some talk about, Mark Zuckerberg recently saying that like the average person only has 2 or 3 friends, but don't worry, we're going to give you a lot of AI chatbots that can become your friends instead. And I just think that like it's a shockingly reductive view of an understanding of what friendship is. Like the idea that friendship is someone who says the right thing at the right time.
It increases
whenever you
radicalization, right?
And you forget that like actually a friendship requires that you show up for the other person, that there's some risk, that there's some vulnerability like that. Like we're craving that as human beings. That's why people, I think, feel anxious and depressed, is because there's just so little like risk and adventure and connection when you're just absorbing media all day. And that's the like juice of the human experience. And we're missing out on it as human beings. And it's only going to get deeper, because I think that like really good junk food can turn off your taste buds for like a really nice juicy carrot, right? I think that similarly, if people are so used to, well, I can just talk to this thing and it understands me so much better and it always responds the right way, why would I talk to my boyfriend about that? Then you're going to start seeing social atrophy and people wanting to spend less and less time actually engaging in real life connections. No matter people going out there saying like, oh, this is meant to like help you, coach yourself so that you'll go out in real life and have a better real life connection. That said, I think we are using AI and again, an objective function of like, can we get people out on more dates? Can we actually be more targeted with the introductions that we're providing you so that you spend less time on the app going through lots of people, and we can actually get a better sense of who you are and who the other people are, and we can set you up on greater dates? And can we coach you in very limited ways, help you write a better prompt, choose a better photo, things like that, so that you are more likely to get out on a date? But that's the kind of extent of how we're thinking about it at Hinge. And it's going to be very, very powerful for those things. I don't want to underplay that, but we have to be just very clear about what it's for and what it's not for.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think it's, AI is obviously an extremely powerful technology. Like every technology in history, you can use it for good things or bad things. But I think this is, I've sort of likened it to like it's a really powerful genie that, may grant your wishes in ways you don't expect. So 1, be really thoughtful about what you ask it to do. And then 2, measure that, put guardrails on that to see, is it actually doing what you wanted it to do? And so the things that, for us, we talk about tuning AI for positivity, tuning AI for inclusivity. And we look at, 1, how do we measure those? So, we're using AI to show people more things that, measurably will help them feel better about themselves, make impact in their life in the real world. But then we measure against that to see, is that actually the outcome that we're achieving? And then, we also look at like, how do we tune it to be more inclusive, more representative? And, an example of like how it can be used for good, and give a little hope for humanity on this. Like when we have done things like our inclusive AI, which, includes things like, body type ranges and skin tone ranges and hair pattern searches and in diversity by default in our feeds, we actually see that these inclusive features are some of our most highly engaging. And, one is great for users to be able to find things that, are representative of themselves. But even we do things like diversity by default in our feeds, one of the things that we see is like, it's not just that people want to see more people like them. People want to see the full rich tapestry of all the people that exist. When we did things like body type ranges, one of the things we found is like, oh, part of what we were going after is like, there were negative examples of where AI was exacerbating an already troubling trend of, sort of unattainable images of beauty, right? Or sort of, a single image of beauty versus saying, no, there are many images of beauty. And it comes in all different forms and all different backgrounds. And as we did that, and did things like diversity by default in our feeds, we actually found that was the most engaging for our users, right? Because what did people want to see? They wanted to see the full rich tapestry of all of what real people are like. Yeah. And so again, I think that's a great example, like just be really intentional with what you ask it to do. And yes, there's other places that are asking it to do different things. And I think this is probably one of the most important conversations of our time right now, which is like you have a battle playing out right now where you have one faction of those that are advancing AI that are basically saying like, it's really important to win, and the only way to win is to let it all rip. No guardrails, just let it all rip. And if that means we have to go, build chat bots that will say awful things to your kids, or engage in sexually explicit interactions, things like that. Like, well, that's just what it takes to win. There's that camp. There's another camp that's saying like, no, we need to have some thoughtful guardrails here, and we're not the only ones. Anthropic's got constitutional AI and things like that, where they're trying to be intentional about it. I think Google's Gemini, has been thoughtful about these things. But I think this is a real sort of battle that's playing out. Is like these two camps of like those that say the only way to win is to throw caution to the wind, let it all rip, versus those that are saying, no, it's important to win, but you need to win responsibly. And I think, I'm not the first to make the comparison to nuclear, but I think it is similar to that. Like, yeah, was it really important to win in nuclear? Yes. But it's also pretty important to make sure you didn't have like radiation spilling all over the place. You need to win the right way. And I think with AI, that's a really, really important conversation. And there's multiple factions on this right now, but I think it's important that we're being clear about which side of that we're on. Of like, yes, we want to win in AI, and we've made it core to our business. It's a big part of how our business is accelerated. But we're also being really clear, we want to win the right way. We want to win with AI in a way that is helpful and additive to people, that is positive and uplifting, that is inclusive, and we're proving that's good for business. And hopefully that'll encourage more people to join that side of the fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's, I've been talking a lot about how I just think it's more critical than ever that we are developing our own senses of personal wisdom and like what we're going to participate in and what we're not going to participate in. Because if you kind of just drift with culture, right, it took us a really long time. It took us basically until Jonathan Haidt's book came out, The Anxious Generation, for people to wake up and realize what incredible harm we're doing to teens through social media. But also I think that there's a level of kind of like basic wisdom that if you just kind of looked at your kid, you'd be like, this doesn't feel good. And so I think we have to be paying a lot more attention and developing our own personal wisdom and thinking very deeply about what we are going to participate in, what we're not going to participate in, what makes us feel good, what doesn't make us feel good, and then think about which companies are committed to values, which companies are showing and demonstrating their commitment to values, and trust those companies, and then not trust these companies that I think are throwing caution to the wind and are being very blasé about their impact, their broader impact on the world.
Well, Justin, I think, speaking of impact, dating, in my circle at least, the words dating and toxic tend to go hand in hand. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about how you are trying to take some of the danger and toxicity out of dating for minorities, as a Black woman who's been on the apps, as, LGBTQ people who might be on the apps. There's sometimes where you match with someone who's trying to cause you harm, right? And so how have you taken on that responsibility and tried to create a safer space in that case?
Yeah, the first step for us is building a highly diverse team and a highly diverse workforce within Hinge. If you cut the Hinge employee base, whether you slice it by gender or you slice it by LGBTQIA+, or you slice it by race, it's almost a perfect mirror for our user base, which I don't think is a coincidence. In fact, we got a much more diverse internal team before we had a much more diverse user base. And it's because you have the voices in the room, and you just can't do this work if you don't have the voices in the room who have the experience, who can share and raise their hand and critique certain product features or say, what about this, or are we thinking about that? So the first thing I think is to do that. What outgrew from that, I think, is a principle for us is designing around marginalized users and always thinking about like how are we designing for our most at-risk users. And we often will build features that end up benefiting everyone. You and I were talking before about we were talking about post-match reveal. This idea that this was developed for trans users originally, and it's something that you don't want to put publicly on your profile, but you don't want to have the conversation over and over and over again with each one of your matches about something that might be very private to you. And so it comes up after you match, right before you match with this person. It says, hey, just so you know, this is something that I want to share about myself. And we thought, okay, this is a great thing for trans users to have. And then what we found are people with STDs would use it. People who are single parents would use it. And it just became like a very, very popular feature that maybe we wouldn't have hit on if we were just kind of designing for the broad user base. We've seen that with a number of safety features. Hidden words is something that we also talked about before, which was a lot of the harm will come through that initial first message that people will send as part of their like. And so we made sure that we both hide those through AI if you opt into that, as well as you can choose your own specific words. If someone says this or uses this word, like just block it, I don't even want to see it. And there's just a number of ways that we continue to iterate around that to make sure that we are serving our most marginalized and at-risk users, which again ensures we continue to grow as a company.
Which is great, because I can hide you up. I could just hide that. No one can text that to me. So you also recently collaborated with Esther Perel, and I think this is something that's also very interesting because, you know, when we talk about algorithmic approach, right, that's definitely an approach run by data, but you're clearly working with, you know, clinicians in the field and, you know, scientists in the field to make sure that there's a psychological approach to kind of the prompts and the coaching that you're doing. So why was that collaboration one that you wanted to go after?
Because I think that we are trying to, we don't envision ourselves, and especially with where AI is going, we don't envision ourselves as just a social platform that you join and then we're like, good luck, go find your person. You know, you go out into a sea of millions of other people. We really want to help guide you through that process, similar to how I think a really good personal matchmaker would. And we talked before about personalized matching. That's one piece of it, where I do think we can start to have deeper conversations with our users directly to understand who are you, what are your values, what's your personality, and then have that conversation with all the other users, and then really help you understand, like, hey, here are the few, maybe like a dozen people that you should really be focusing on right now, as opposed to feeling like you're going through an endless feed. So that's one piece of it. And then the coaching piece as well. We're just realizing that people need a lot of help. We have prompts in the app, which are these short questions designed to get you into conversations. We've optimized those over time just through data and understanding which prompts are likely to lead to a conversation and a date, and which ones aren't. And there are ones that are easy to answer, like my go-to karaoke song, that never lead to a date because no one cares what your go-to karaoke song is. There are like very deeply vulnerable questions that people don't really want to answer, but they would lead to a date if you'd answer them. And then there's like the sweet spot of questions that are like, I'm willing to say this, and also someone's going to find this interesting. And we also look, and I think as we get more capability to match people better and to coach people better, we look for inspiration from the outside. Matchmakers, relationship science, and therapists and relationship coaches who can help give us inspiration about how we can help guide and coach our users towards deeper and more authentic and more intimate connection. And I think there's no better name in the industry for that than Esther.
Yeah. So a wrap-up question, I think, what should we all be considering as we go off and open our phones right after this conversation and start to engage with our apps? Like, what do you really think is the root of like digital well-being that everyone should be focused on kind of as we go off into the world?
You know, I would say to your question about like sort of how powerful AI is getting, I think, you know, it's hard to fully impress upon anyone just how powerful the AI is and how addictive it has become. And I think anybody that's on these social apps has probably had the experience of like, oh yeah, I just kind of look for 5 minutes, and then like an hour, year later, like, where'd my time go? And like, did I actually do anything? Do I feel better about myself? And so it's, just like anything else that is potentially addictive, I think it's really important to be intentional about what healthy use looks like and set boundaries for yourself, for your loved ones, for the people you care about. Of like, what does healthy usage actually look like? And I think that's really important because just the addictive power, because not every app is trying to tune for positivity. Most of them are still tuning for how do we maximize view time, and credit to those, Justin, like yourself, that are finding a different way to do that, but most are not. And so I think it starts with being like really intentional before you start using it about what healthy usage looks like and setting those boundaries for yourself and for others. And then I'd also say, like, especially with social media, it is a collective action problem. And so talk to other people. If you're a parent, talk to the parents of the other kids, right? If you've talked to anybody that's had a school-age kid, get to the age of like wanting to start social media, you see it fall one by one. It's like, oh, we're not gonna have social media. Well, then one friend did, and then another friend did, and then another friend did. And then if you're the last one holding out, then your kid's feeling ostracized and left out. And this is a lot of the sort of opposition research that says, oh, see, social media is not really the problem because we pulled out a control group or a test group in a high school and took away social media, and 2 months later they had just as much anxiety and depression. It's like, well, there was an equal offsetting effect of the of being left out, feeling ostracized, that led to an equal and offsetting amount of anxiety and depression. So it is a collective action problem. So like, talk to the parents of your kids' friends, talk to your school leaders, talk to others in your community about what healthy choices look like, and band together on those things. So.
Yeah, I think it's back to the idea of personal wisdom. Like, we have our own internal barometer, and you mentioned it before, which is this, like, how do you feel at the end of how you use that thing? Do you have like oh, that didn't feel so good, what happened to my time, like, oh? Or do you have a, wow, I feel empowered, I'm ready to like go out and take on the day? And stop doing the things that make you feel bad. I mean, I personally have a history with addiction, alcohol addiction. Like, it feels great the night out, and then you feel really bad the next day. And at a certain point, I had to be like, is the high worth the crash?
Right.
And it's not. And I think we have to just pay attention to like those things that are making us feel that way, and use our own barometer and have the courage or discipline or whatever you want to put it to just say, like, I'm going to put those things aside. I don't use social media. I don't have it on my phone. I just don't engage in it at all. And if I want to talk to my friends, I call them or I text them.
Yeah.
And I find I get together with my friends a lot in real life because that's my only vehicle to do it. And I feel great. I feel like I have a rich tapestry of friends, and I feel enriched from them.
I think to your point about not using it, I should say this more crisply, and we've demonstrated this with our own actions because we turned off social for under 16. But very pointedly, social media as currently configured is not safe for children under 16. Full stop.
It's not safe for any of you.
Yeah, that's right. But
it's not.
Yeah. Oh, well, don't open your apps when you leave this, unless it's Pinterest or Hinge. Yeah, the Aspen app. It's safe. That one's safe.
There are great apps out there, just not the ones that are designed to harvest your attention and sell it to the highest bidder.
Right.
Like, use Uber, use Airbnb. Like, great. Like,
Get out.
Get out there.
Yeah, get outside.
Yeah.
So now we have some time for questions. Thank you both for all of that wisdom that you share with us. So we'll take a couple questions here.
So as a Gen Z person in the
I was about to say,
audience-
someone who's
Yes.
Gen Z.
Someone who's 17, and I actually only recently got a phone when I was like 13 or 14, and I instantly got involved in social media and actually moved from Russia not that long ago, like 4 years ago, so around that time, and noticed how kind of different people are here in America, how much more radicalized they are, and really it all depends on their social media usage. Like, some kids who don't have phones are usually very kind and nice to you, but some kids who are like doom scrolling TikTok for 12 hours a day, like just turning off their brains, they're much more radicalized. And so I was wondering, with great CEOs like you who are trying to make the internet a safer place for ours, are you guys going to keep continuing expanding and building on specific, like, young adult, like teenagers, above 16 sections of your app, so we can get these like news, information about our friends without like all the toxicity that's present with traditional social media?
I think that there is a ripe opportunity in the market right now to develop like a whole new industry that I would call social wellness, which we shouldn't have had to have created this. Social networks should have been that,
Yeah.
but they veered into social media. We didn't call it, by the way, social media when it started. We called it social networks.
Yeah, social networks.
A network of your friends, but now it's not that because it's just media. And there was an opportunity to go the other direction, and I think there is a major opportunity right now to build a social wellness where the top level metrics are feelings of belonging and connection with your friends, not time spent in app. And I do hope that someone goes out there. I'm busy with Hinge right now. Otherwise, it's certainly what I would be doing, and building a way for people to connect thoughtfully and meaningfully with each other.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think one other thing I'd add to it is that even for the social media part of it, I think one of the things that people don't realize is that even though there's been this huge what you would call democratization of the ability to create content,
Right.
the distribution of that content is now down to only a few platforms. When I was growing up, we started out with 3 or 4 TV channels, and then all of a sudden we had like hundreds of cable channels.
Yeah.
But we could make a choice. If we didn't like what we were watching, we just changed the channel. Well, if you only have a few places distributing all the content,
Right.
you think it's democratized because anybody can create the content, but you only have a few platforms that are distributing the content. And the thing that most other tech CEOs won't say is that those that are building these platforms are making a form of editorial choice in how they tune the algorithm. And it's not the same as the editorial choice that the publisher of a newspaper would make, where you can read every piece of content, you get billions of pieces of content every day. You can't make that kind of editorial choice. But you can decide when you tune the algorithm. You're asking about polarization and radicalization and things like that. Do you tune the algorithm to surface the content that is the most even-handed and diplomatic, the most well-reasoned debate? Or do you tune for the thing that's going to be the most provocative
Right.
and the most incendiary? And I think that is what we have seen, is that a lot of these platforms have made a conscious editorial choice to say, we're going to tune for the things that keep you looking the longest, which tend to be the most provocative, the most sensational. And to your point of is there a business opportunity? We don't do news. We're not in that business. But is there an opportunity for, we've been very clear about our editorial choice, that we are tuning for positivity. And we're doing that around things that help you build a life you love. But could someone else say they're going to go build a news platform that is actually trying to surface the most well-reasoned debate
Right.
instead of the most, sensational,
Headline.
points of
Right.
views? I think there's real opportunity around that.
Well, we'll be looking for you to start that business any day now. 2 more questions right here.
Thanks, Jaden. Hi, I'm Erica Kesman. I'm actually an author of a book called Bring Your Human to Work. So I am feeling more hopeful than I have felt in a really long time. So thank you for that. My question is, you both talk a lot about company values, and clearly you have companies that live the values. And we also know that Gen Z, all the young people want to work for companies that have purpose and have meaning. So we've talked a lot about your customers and all the people that come on your apps, but my question is, how does this show up internally in your organizations for your employees and your culture?
Yeah, we at Hinge we have a. I started a while ago when we did the reboot. I started a Google Doc where I just wrote down all our principles of how we operate, so that everyone, when you started at Hinge on day 1, you didn't have to learn the culture through osmosis over the course of 18 months. You could just read it, and it was very detailed and specific. Over time, we've really distilled that down to 4 core principles and 3 values, and we wrote a book on it called How We Do Things, and it's just an internal book, but you can find it on our website, and I can't tell you how many people have come to Hinge because they read that book on our website, and they're like, this is the company that I want to come work at. And I think getting really, really clear and intentional and explicit on your values so that everyone holds themselves accountable, because every single person in my company knows it. It's a religion, and if people deviate, everyone's raising their hand to say hey, we shouldn't be making a decision like this, we shouldn't be making a decision like that. And so I think it's really, really important to get very explicit and clear and defined on your internal culture, and make it almost a religion as much as you can, so that everyone is holding the water together.
I completely agree with that. I think the more we've become really clear on our values, what we stand for, how we're building against those, it's become a great talent magnet for us. I think we end up punching way above our weight in terms of attracting amazing talent, not just in AI, but across every function we have, because people are inspired and want to contribute to solving what anybody that has a young person in their life knows is a significant problem. and that's attracting a lot of great talent for us. And so I do think being clear about those values, it's also part of how you can build a great business when you're clear about those, stand by those values. But I'll also say the other side of this, I think people don't always talk about, which is, it's easy to say you have values until it costs you something to stand by them. And, I think something else that maybe not a lot of leaders will talk about is like, there are real pressures around these things, right? I gave the example of like when we did private only for under 16, like our stock dropped by over 20%. That was a damned hot seat to sit on. And I had a lot of conviction that one, I believed it was the right thing to do. And two, I really believed that people just needed an alternative choice. They just needed a healthy alternative. But I think part of why I speak on these things is I hope it helps others have more of the courage of their conviction to not just do what is convenient in the short term, but that you can actually make it through and do what's right in the long term. And again, back to like being a talent, this being a sort of talent attractor. And I'll leave this as a sign of hope and optimism. In Silicon Valley, where I think there's a lot of people that sort of feel like, boy, like, do people really care? How are they letting this happen? Like, we're attracting great people in Silicon Valley that are like, yeah, we've been part of building some of these things, but we want to help build an answer. We want to help build something better. And I think, yes, it's not always easy to stand by those values, and it does, it does cost you something at times. But I do think there's a lot of benefit to be had in the end. It's just short-term versus long-term. And if you're willing to see through that long-term and take the short-term pain, it can actually really help to bolster your business. That's been true for us. It's been true for the people that we're attracting. I do think there's more people, particularly in the tech world, that are looking for places where they can do that. Not just us. I think there's others that are trying to build in this way that are attracting talent through that too. So hopefully that's another.
We're over time. Sorry. Yeah. We're over time, but I promise one more question. So.
It is that like saved us all and then was there witnessing kind of how hard it was to fight against the fundamental incentive structure and the business model that we were set up for. And so now I run an organization that is supporting kind of alternative forms of social media to be built that are healthy, that are not incentivized by surveillance advertising. But I'm really inspired by both of you. I mean, you at Pinterest, you are using advertising as a business model, and yet you've been able to keep these guardrails around it. And I think one of the trends it is that we're really trying to counter is the pressure from venture capital and the pressure from those investors. And you just talked about kind of what it felt like to be in that hot seat when you made this decision to go off 16. Like, that had growth and engagement and consequences that the investors, I imagine, were concerned about. And I'm just wondering, as we build this alternative to serve the needs of young people who do want healthy places to go, figuring out that supply chain of capital and aligning that with this mission feels like a really important thing to unlock. And I'm just like curious to hear more about what you learned in that process.
Well, this is, I started out the conversation by saying like part of what I wanted to do is prove there's a different business model for social media. Because I think you do have to prove there's a good business in positivity. And I think we're proving that every day, every quarter, that we're going to win, but we're going to win in the right way. And we're going to prove there's a good business in positivity. And I share the things that we're doing. We actually did, in collaboration with the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's Hospital with Dr. Michael Rich, who's in the room, the Inspired Internet Pledge that basically said, like, we're going to measure our impacts on emotional well-being, publish those impacts, commit to getting better, and then share the findings. Because I hope that if we can prove there's a good business in positivity, it's going to help others so that those capital flows will actually say, oh, well, it was a good investment to be invested in positivity over here. I want to invest in other places that are thinking about alternate ways to build in a healthier, more positive way. You need, back to like the health food metaphor, you need health food to be a good business. Yeah. And how do we show there's a good business in building a healthier alternative? That's absolutely part of what we're after, because I think only when you do that will you change the ecosystem in a more fundamental way and attract more capital, more investment behind healthier alternatives.
Yeah, and you were acquired, so you definitely had to deal with like capital.
Yeah, it's part of a public company now. But I think that But we're dealing with a public company that learned, we'll say, like, kind of learned their lesson of what happens when you don't build a sustainable business model.
Right.
And so now they are more interested in a more sustainable business model that actually is going to go the distance and isn't going to just deliver a few quarters of growth and then
Peter off.
yeah, and then start to struggle.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
Questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.